Generation X. In general terms, those born between 1965 and 1980. Latchkey kids. Independent. Existentialism. Modern philosophy focusing on personal experience, human ability, and responsibility in an otherwise meaningless universe. We're the cause. This is the effect. We're the Gen Existentialists. Welcome in, everybody, to the Gen Existentialist podcast. My name is Scott.
And I'm Bunny.
And we're here with you for the next 20 minutes or so, talking about all manner of things Gen X related. We have a special guest with us again this week. It is Dr. Pamela Menges. Pam, how you doing?
I'm fine. How's it going with you?
It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Now, contrary to the last two shows where we dove off into some really cool, high-tech, scientific-y stuff, we're going to try and get back to the regular format, or try to. So I'm going to go ahead and spin Mega Wheel of Magnificent and see what kind of question we get. And the wonderful thing about Mega Wheel is over 500 questions, all kinds of topics, all kinds of different things that can come up. And I'm not quite sure how to answer this one. It says, shall we play a game?
Oh, yeah.
Because we were talking about AI during the last show, I'm kind of frightened now because I feel like my phone was listening, and if it offers me global thermonuclear war on this next spin, I'm going to be very frightened.
Well, that's the answer, right? The only way to win the game is to play it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. How else are you going to know whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing?
Yeah. Frankie Goes to Hollywood made a song about that. Remember that one?
Actually, let's turn that into the topic.
Yeah.
Shall we play a game? Let's talk about nuclear stuff, nuclear war.
Okay.
Because it's something we're Gen X. We grew up with.
That was supposed to traumatize an entire generation, right?
Well, it did. I feel traumatized by it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I think that's the point. I think that's the point where I stopped worrying. It was like Dr. Strangelove. I quit caring because I was like, what am I going to do?
But, you know, as long as you get under your desk, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I want that desk permanently fused to my back so I run around like a turtle.
Yeah.
I could put pencils in my shell.
Exactly. It'll be perfect. And we have the perfect person to discuss these kind of things with. So, Pam, wax poetic. Tell us about nuclear war.
Oh, my God.
From your perspective.
From my perspective, we've probably been fighting a nuclear war for a very long time. Mostly between Washington and different contractors. But we have unfortunately reached a point with our nuclear stockpile. People are just like, oh, crap, we're not going to listen to this. But if you turn it off now, you're going to miss a lot of really interesting stuff, including, the giant warehouse from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Those really exist. And if you leave now, you won't hear about them. And
you won't hear about the top men. Top men that we have working on it. Those top men, just in case you were wondering, me and Bunny.
That's it. But we really weren't the duck and cover generation. They were before us. That was like the Beaver guys, like, was it the 50s? And we had Ronald Reagan promising us we would have mail delivery after a nuclear Armageddon. The problem with our nuclear stockpile isn't the original work done on it, because actually this may make you feel good as an American. We were the very best at nuclear weapons. Our bombs were the best. And it really wasn't until recent years, particularly in the 2004 timeframe, that we had people in Washington making decisions about our nuclear stockpile that were not always the best. And now we have to create derivatives of existing warheads, which are being deployed in NATO as we speak. Probably one of the reasons Putin got his nose out of joint. But really, our nuclear stockpile is very large, and we've probably over 3,700 weapons. And the American people really need to decide what we want to do about that over the next 20 years, because every nuclear warhead needs to be remanufactured every 10 to 12 years as part of the nuclear stockpile stewardship programs to keep them reliable, safe, and secure. So this is something, and it's frightening, I guess, for some people, but the reality is it costs us a lot of money. And we have a lot of treasure and resources and people working on it. And there have been several books recently written about the people who work in the nuclear community. And I know a lot of folks probably saw Oppenheimer last summer, and they think that they know about the Manhattan Project now, and they don't. It was like watching the Manhattan Project through a keyhole, trying to understand a man who did some amazing work at a time that we really had very few choices. So, let's see if we can get smart and make some better choices.
And I guess from that perspective, one of the things that always frightens me, and this kind of calls back to last episode when we were talking about contractors, it kind of goes into the low bid process, because not all of the stuff that happens is U.S. government employees. It's contractors and things like that, right?
Well, here's the thing. Nuclear community is different. And that's the kind of cool part of this, is that the national laboratories are owned by the Department of Energy and the American people, but they're run by contractors. The environment, the regulations, the rules, all around those operations, those laboratories, are radically different than every other aspect of government contracting.
So they are held more accountable.
Oh, absolutely. There are significant rules. You apply for a particular job, and you are under a surveillance program. And they are very serious about the people they hire. They're very serious about the people they train. And I was lucky. I was trained by the people who founded most of the programs that created the security infrastructure we have now. The person who trained me, was my doctoral advisor in physics, was a man by the name of Dr. William Highland Chambers. And the average American has never heard about Bill, but everybody in this country is alive because of him. He founded the Nuclear Emergency Search Team and created most of the nuclear safeguard and nonproliferation programs that were built in the U.S. and internationally with our allies over a 30-year period. And there was a book written about him called Diffusing Armageddon. And it's a great book if you're really interested, a little bit about history and the weapons community. It's probably the one that'll tell you the most. Bill was a highly decorated World War II pilot. And he was telling me a story one time when he knew a lot about airplanes. This, parenthetically, there's a reason why I told you that. He's walking through an airport with a valise in his hand, a suitcase or something, and he had a phone in his ear because he had earplugs so he could listen to the instrument, whether or not they could find anything. In the middle of the terminal, his alarm went off. And he's saying they're going, well, this isn't good. And he's trying to understand why he's detecting uranium. Well, uranium used to be used to do the weight and balance things for the big jets because they put spent uranium in the tails of the old transport jets so they could be balanced properly with the engines. Something people didn't know. So that was, one of the stories. But more importantly, for the 2 or 3 electrical engineers out there and the physics teacher listening, that really demonstrates the level of capabilities that were developed by these people, these men and women in the laboratories, particularly at places like Los Alamos and Livermore, that were able to build these instruments that were able to detect spent uranium in a jet tail 300 feet away from that instrument.
Right.
So we had the people who were the best at what they did. Yeah.
And those people and those systems are a large part of why things are still, quote unquote, okay today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the people like me that were trained, the American people invested a lot of money in my training, and I thank you very much. When I was recruited to go to Los Alamos, I thought I was going to be working on AI agent-based expert databases to track information on different technologies. And I ended up being recruited into the intelligence unit, working for Dr. Lawrence Booth, also another person the American people should know about. Brilliant plasma physicist, one of the tops in the country, and he spent his life working to defend this country. And these are the scientists and engineers who could easily win Nobel Prizes, who spend their careers not being known, not having the American people know about them, but spent their lives defending the American people and doing the good work that has kept us going today. The comment I made earlier is when I started doing some work at the laboratory, I went to nuclear weapons school. Everybody should go to nuclear weapons school. It's great training. I studied weapons and I studied inspection. And what they gave me as a person who no longer works in the nuclear complex is an understanding of security, safety, and integrated systems in ways that a lot of people may not understand in the real world. And what that means is that when I build something and I work in an organization, I can generally contribute to that organization in ways that a lot of people can't. The other part of it is one of the jobs I had first off was working on something really boring called the Nuclear Supplier Group Handbook. And we wrote that with an organization in Russia called the Kurchatov Institute. And basically what it did, we were talking about technologies on one of the earlier shows, is it looked at dual use or commercial technologies that could be applied to weapons. And we wrote a book around that so countries within, well, good part of the world, maybe 100 plus countries, would have access to this handbook to be able to look at the technologies that they were buying and selling and were being imported and exported in their countries to make the world a little bit safer place.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things we did. And the way I can tell you that the warehouses, like on Raiders of the Lost Ark, actually exist is I walked into one and I went, wow, this is like a Raiders warehouse. And so the American people need to know they have a lot of real estate they don't know about. Yeah. But that one was actually full of giant electromagnets that were used to make nuclear materials for weapons at one point in time. Yeah. And then it just went on for acres.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you a quick question, because one of the things that I do in my current job is write programs, safety-related programs for the company I work for. And sometimes the most difficult thing is not writing the program. I understand, safety, both regulatory requirements, legal requirements, how to best do it. I've got experience in industry, so I look at things from the production perspective too. The hardest thing sometimes is the implementation and having people follow the programs and do the things that are set, follow the protocols that are set forth. Do you have people in those industries, in those pursuits, that will knowingly cut corners and willfully ignore safety protocols? I wouldn't imagine that you do, or if you do, they don't last very long.
No, they don't. They don't last very long. No, really, no, because most of the people in those jobs are really dedicated at what they do, and they tend to be very bright. The big thing about finding the smart scientists and engineers to do those jobs is also finding the smart engineers and scientists who are situationally aware, so they can work in their environment. We had people at Los Alamos who were exceedingly intelligent, but they also needed keepers because they could walk into traffic. I mean, they were like, Sheldon on speed. Yeah. So, yeah. And that's a reference to Big Bang Theory. But the nuclear community is actually a very dedicated, competent community. And it falls under the Department of Energy, which the American people are unaware is a defense and intelligence agency as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Bunny, you look like you've been chomping at the bit here for like the
I actually haven't. Minutes. I've just been listening, but thanks for checking in.
So from a nuclear weapons and potential warfare perspective, what questions do you have?
Well, we were talking before this show started about Discover magazine back in the 80s. They had this wonderful spread about the Star Wars program, which was another, I believe, Reagan program back in the day, with this cool pull-out poster of satellites full of missiles and things blowing up over the planet, on this battlefield in orbit. Now, what were your opinions of Star Wars and the rumors of war or whatever that have been happening lately about, people are shooting down satellites, hypersonic missiles, blah, blah, blah.
It's the aliens.
Yeah, what's your opinion of all that?
Wow, that's a complex question. Star Wars was the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was the biggest pork barrel program in the history of the United States. It did actually help lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union in many ways. mostly because there was a point in time where the Soviets said, these people are nuts, and we don't want to fight them. A lot of stuff that came out of the SDI Star Wars program in terms of really advancing things were things like supercomputers, better lasers, unfortunately no killer drones. I'm sorry. We have killer drones now, but
it just took us a while.
It took us a while. But no, I mean, really, SDI did more to build infrastructures and train people than it did to actually create new weapons. The 1990s was weird. I think because everybody in Washington was getting stoned in blowjobs, but
music sucked.
Yeah. Well,
sorry.
Yeah, it really did. But I think really what's come out of it is that we learned that probably some of the old-fashioned weapons, the old-fashioned cruise missiles, Hellfire missiles, a lot of those things that were developed a long time ago, Sidewinders and things, are what we generally use today in terms of conventional weapons. And yeah, we've updated things. We've got better computers. We've got better tracking. But generally speaking, we have very similar technologies in terms of the actual weapon systems that we used, 30, 40, 50 years ago. There's no change in the explosives. They're all the same explosives. The concern I have is that we've spent, I don't know how many billions right now on the Ukraine, and Iran has created a drone, what they call a loitering drone, which is basically a type of cruise missile, because it's a terminal use drone. In other words, it has a warhead on board. That really isn't that dissimilar from what we called the aerial torpedo in World War I, because the Allies created basically an aircraft with 500 pounds of explosives in it and flew it into Germany and blew it up by radio control. So we have countries that are not expending a lot of money, kind of giving some really expensive weapon systems a challenge.
Yeah.
And the big problem is that the drones that are being built by the Iranians are using navigation hardware and software from China that you can buy online.
Yeah.
And so warfare is radically asymmetrical today, certainly from a financial perspective. And that's the big change.
It almost seems like technologically guerrilla warfare, making do with what you've got and having
Sure. I had a question regarding that. You were mentioning that Hellfire, Sidewinder, those types of missiles, cruise missiles, they're all things that have been around for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of talk online of people complaining and bitching that technology in general has become sort of stagnant. That we're using the same things that we've been using over and over again, certain devices. Taking that to a warfare perspective, do you feel there's a reason why we're not really developing so many new systems, that we're just kind of falling back on old systems? Is there a reason for that?
Well, the Army just had its second helicopter failure in terms of a program after spending tons of money. So yeah, there's a problem. We're using the same defense contractors we've always used. We're not changing the expectations in Congress. Congress isn't writing the legislation the defense contractors and their puppeteers are. Or their puppets are, excuse me. So yeah, there are technologies. Where we're excelling right now in technology is in surveillance systems, and they can track us with our phones, and yes, they do. And there are robots reading our emails, and we have dossiers being collected on us, and that is reality. That's where we're excelling in data.
Mega Wheel just popped up a message that said, "No, we're not." I delete. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. But I mean, the reality is, in terms of the things that blow up, that kind of stuff, we did a good job. There's no reason to re-engineer it. If you take apart a Russian weapon system, you can see the history of the developmental manufacturing bureau that made it. So if you take a Russian missile apart, maybe like an AA-10 or something, and you're going to see the same way they made stuff in 1968. And it's worked for them. And, you know, all I can say is it works for them. But in terms of really advanced weapons, the kinds of stuff where we're excelling is in imaging now. We can do stuff in terms of space imaging that hadn't been done by anybody else. I mean, we really are exceptionally good at what we do. We have a kind of a triad system in terms of surveillance. We did have a Chinese balloon try to attack us, apparently. And I tried to see what it would cost to launch a bouncy castle, and it was a lot of money, so we didn't do that. But the future issues around national security for the United States, particularly for CONUS, the continental United States, really isn't weapons from foreign countries. It's what we're integrating in our infrastructure in terms of things like the Internet of Things, the devices that we're implementing that aren't trusted devices. We know I worked with the American Society of Civil Engineers Environmental and Water Resource Institute. See, engineers make everything's difficult. So we wrote a book called Renewable Energy in the Water Infrastructure. And what we found out was that water plants around the country have had people attacking them through their IoT systems. And they're like, oh, well, it's not a problem. They didn't do any permanent damage. They just turned our lights on and off. They dumped some extra chemicals in the water, and we were able to, you know, prevent that from being a problem. Well, no, dumbass. It's called penetration testing. Sure. And we're trying to find ways to take down your infrastructure. Mm. And so in a lot of ways, we're our own worst enemy, because we're importing lots of cheap digital devices that have a lot of common, if not open source components, and we're not doing the kind of security work that we should be doing.
The silence of the two. Here's the bomb. It's dropped. No, that was an interesting take on things there. I mean, that's
the thing that it makes me wonder is this. Obviously, we're worried about foreign threats, and yeah, I mean, a lot of the cheap electronic gadgets you buy, the stuff, because everybody's looking for the lowest cost. Everybody's like, government-wise, it's going to be the lowest bidder. The water sanitation and treatment plants aren't going to go with solid tech if they can get cheaper tech. It just, when you go with the low bid, you get low quality in general. You're going to get the cheap stuff, and it's going to have vulnerabilities. And I just wonder at what point, and maybe it's a chicken and the egg thing, at what point do we as a species, as a creature, decide, let's not worry about killing each other so much. Why don't we try to work on making life better for everybody? And yeah, I know it comes back to, is there a profit in it? Because everything's driven by the almighty dollar and shit like that. But it's so disturbing to me that we have to worry about this kind of stuff. It's so silly, the divisiveness and the divides that there are from states to countries to religions. It's what keeps life from being good. It really is.
Well, coming at it from a Defense Department perspective, how much of this do you think is general ignorance that these kind of things are happening, and how much of it do you think is actually orchestrated or malevolent? I'm speaking from our own people, our own government, our own Wall Street.
Oh, I don't really think there's any malevolence here. I think it's stupidity.
Okay.
Which is worse than malevolence.
Well, look, it's just this convergence of what's happened because we outsource so much of our engineering, our development, our devices, our technology. They realized when Biden came back in office, oh shit, we're in trouble because the Chinese are chipping everything. Chipping means basically they're placing chips that are in some way able to do some things in your device that you may not want them to do. Like you may not care if the Chinese know if you have milk in your refrigerator, but the reality is it's able to control other devices and get other information because it's part of a network. So it's not about necessarily the end user. It's the fact that all this crap is networked. And the big question is, can we manufacture things at home in America? Can we do that reasonably well and create products that are accessible to businesses and agencies and have them secure? And can we get the chips that are secure? We've got so many demands for integrated circuits right now that, the government's dumped, I don't know, $100 billion into new manufacturing of semiconductors and basic chips because they're needed for batteries. They're needed for every device we have, every interconnected product that we're building. It's necessary. What we found out through the EWRI group, the water infrastructure thing, is that if we use renewable energy sources to support these interconnected devices, they're a heck of a lot more secure because they're not using the grid to operate. So interestingly, from that perspective, renewable powered platforms for devices can make us a heck of a lot more secure.
And that brings to mind the kind of standoff between China and the United States about, is it not Hong Kong, but the Taiwan, because the world's largest chip manufacturer is based there. So why would China want that? Because then they would control basically everything. Information, technology. Why are we so concerned about it? It's not for the people of Taiwan. It's a quote-unquote national security thing. There's a manufacturer there that literally the world economy could hang in the balance of who controls that area and that company. So, and on that note, that's the happy things here on Gen Existentialists, right? If people want to get in touch with us, Bunny, how would they do so?
Hey, why don't you drop us a line at the Morning Pizza Radio email? That's morningpizzaradio@proton.me. Or you can just leave us a message or a comment at the Mixcloud page where we found this. Let us know what you think of all this highfalutin talk.
Yeah, I can't imagine that we don't get a ton of messages for these last few episodes. Pam, final thoughts for this episode?
Well, like I've said before, this is the United States. We can do anything we want.
Absolutely. My name's Scott.
I'm Bunny.
We'll catch you next time. Have a good one.
First we got the bomb, and that was good, 'cause we love peace and motherhood. Then Russia got the bomb, but that's okay, 'cause the balance of power's maintained that way. Who's next? France got the bomb, but don't you grieve, 'cause they're on our side, I believe. China got the bomb, but have no fears. They can't wipe us out for at least 5 years. Who's next? Then Indonesia claimed that they were gonna get one any day. South Africa wants two, that's right. One for the black and one for the white. Who's next? Egypt's gonna get one too, just to use on you know who. So Israel's getting tense, wants one in self-defense. The Lord's our shepherd, says the psalm, but just in case, we better get a bomb. Who's next? Luxembourg is next to go, and who knows, maybe Monaco. We'll try to stay serene and calm when Alabama gets the bomb. Who's next? Who's next? Who's next? Who's next?